5 explorers arrived in the town of Cyroc. They had just removed the treasure from a long-lost chapel, all of which was loaded onto the back of their largest member, Flower, whose face was covered in a cloak so as not to frighten the local residents. But there were 2 treasures that were the most valuable. One would lead them to the lost Longmon city of Nan Salvoth. The other was a clue that could unlock a great mystery of the world, the etchings of a symbol carved into the chapel of Adudu, otherwise known as the Chapel of Doom. Other treasures included more than 100 gold, 5 gems, each worth more than 50 gold, a mighty composite longbow, which Rafe took, a tanglefoot bag, and a masterfully crafted breastplate which might be magical. They had come to Cyroc to rest and regroup, and also to learn what they could about the clues they had found. Cyroc was the central village for the region southwest of the Great Spire in the central continent of Thalos. Farmers, shepherds, trappers, southern explorers, and merchants wandered in and out of town, weaving through the narrow streets and in and out of the many shops, restaurants, and pubs. Everyone in the small band that had just entered town had something they wanted to do, so they split up to get their business done and agreed on a place and time to meet. Diomed would be taking the magical items they had acquired to be studied at the local guild shop. Rafe would be going to the inn to check on local rumors. Jane and Bob would accompany Flower to the local St. Cuthbert Cathedral, where he would show the priests the etchings and the cryptic map to see if they could make anything of them. About a block away from the cathedral, Jane told Flower and Bob that they should be safe traveling from there, and she broke off, hurrying in the direction Rafe had gone. She found him winding through several alleys and passing a few pubs. She remained out of sight, shadowing him until he came upon a small band of individuals who seemed to be just hanging around the streets with little to do. They looked as shady as the thieves the group had fought at the bridge. Jane hid behind some crates and spied on Rafe and his companions. The city was too loud for her to hear what they were saying, but she saw him speaking privately with them, their faces close so their words would not be intercepted by others. Then Rafe's companions hurried away while Rafe looked around to see if he was being watched. Jane hid and waited. Rafe passed by her, not seeing Jane, and strolled into a pub. It had taken Diomed extra time to find the local magic guild shop. Typically, they stood out in their exactness in every detail and complex architecture. The one here was no more than a trick shop with only a sign to separate it from the others. Diomed was unimpressed with the inside as well, with items dropped hither and yon on the shelves with no true order or category. The shopkeep was equally unhelpful. Every time Diomed asked a question, it soon became obvious that Diomed already knew more than him. Diomed suddenly missed the scholarly community of Io, and the misty pillars of enlightenment. He was a long way from home. "Looks like you picked up a nice black ion stone," came a high-pitched yet well-traveled voice behind Diomed. "You might not want to be flashing that around." Diomed turned, and much to his relief, found a fellow gnome there. She wore shades of blue and bright pink hair. She bore a nose ring, a necklace, and rings on her fingers, all of which Diomed immediately knew to be magical. "You were trying to get it identified," she observed. "You're not going to find anyone who knows anything here, nor anywhere close, I'm sorry to say." "I had hoped the humans might have started to catch up with our kind," Diomed said. "But it seems they continue to rely on their gods no matter how much their gods abandon them." "There are some who are interested in education and power of elemental manipulation," the gnome woman said. "Some of them are even experimenting with music and entertainment as a means to harness magical energy." "Or they're using it as an excuse to waste time as artists," Diomed scoffed. "I wouldn't be so sure if I were you," she said. "Have you ever seen it work?" he asked skeptically. "I've seen it and tried it," she said, doing a little dance. As she waved her hands in front of her and swayed her legs and hips, a swirl of wind developed before her, and light emerged. It spun in the wind, then began dancing to the rhythm she was making with her movements. "Hey! No magic in the magic shop!" the storekeep shouted. Diomed expected the gnome to stop, but she didn't. She turned it into a small bowl, which began trampling through the shop. It didn't damage a thing, of course. It was an illusion. But it scared the owner, who continued to shout at the 2 gnomes and called for help. The gnome grabbed Diomed's hand and ran out into the street, where they quickly became lost among the crowds. "What's your name?" Diomed asked. "Phaedra," she said. "Diomed," Diomed said. Neither had last names. The gnomes were an efficient and busy people. Their numbers remained constant, and their names were regulated so no one had the same. If a mistake was made and two were found to have the same name, the older kept it, and the younger was required to change theirs. About this point, Diomede's rat climbed out of his pack and took a look around to see what was going on. "A rat familiar!" Phaedra squealed. "How adorable!" She reached forward and pet its head. "I've not seeked one out yet. Does a rat make a good familiar?" "So far so good," Diomede responded. Phaedra smiled at him, then said, "Get thee to Exeter, Diomede. Up the Nemarian River. Exciting things are happening in magic there. They may even be able to identify the rest of your trinkets. And they can show you how to use your Ion Stone," she said, placing her finger on his chest. Diomede looked down at her hand, then back up at Phaedra. But she was gone. He placed out his hand to grab her invisible form, but it was no longer there. He wondered for a moment if she had been real, or an illusion in his mind. Colored light splashed down upon Flower and Bob from the sunlight through the stained glass windows of the cathedral. The brightness hurt Bob's eyes, even though he could feel the magical healing power that came through them. He looked up and saw where Flower got his name. His face was pointed toward the light, soaking it in with a wide, serene grin, much like a flower in bloom. But Bob was restless. He got up and strolled around the cathedral, looking at the statues of important people in the history of the church, of gods and demigods, friends and heroes of St. Cuthbert. After humanity's enslavement to the dragons and their hordes, St. Cuthbert, who had been crafted like all gods from the collective beliefs of his followers, swore revenge on the beasts and was responsible for the hunting down and destroying of the dragons. Bob lingered on a large painting of the followers of St. Cuthbert's greatest accomplishment, the destruction of the Council of Drakes, the dragon's seat of power. It was at this moment, historians believed, that the dragons officially went extinct. Bob heard Flower get up and move about, but Bob was so enthralled in the artwork now that he didn't look around. He saw most prominently painted in the artwork a golden mace being wielded by a hero of St. Cuthbert, who was bringing it down on the last dragon. The mace was a theme among their statues as well, and was the weapon wielded by St. Cuthbert himself in the statue at the front of the hall. Bob had never expected to have an interest in religion, but this piqued his interest. He heard Flower re-enter the room, but with far less clattering. Bob looked at him and saw that Flower was no longer carrying the loot they had taken from the Chapel of Doom. "You found a place to put down all the loot?" Bob asked. "Yes," Flower answered. "Are you sure it's safe?" "Yes." "That must be a load off your shoulders." "Yes." "Your god. He's quite a deity." "Yes." "I thought it was the gods Hieronis and Hextor who led the humans against their masters." "They start job. We finish it. Then Hextor become evil." "You really know this religious history stuff, don't you?" "Yes." Bob looked around the place again, admiring it on a new level now. Then he had a thought. "Where did you put all our loot?" "Donation box." "What?" "I donate to church. They very happy." "All of it?" "Yes." "That was ours!" "No shouting in church." Indiana Jane found Rafe sitting alone at one of the tables in the pub, already with a pint of strong liquor. He saw her immediately as he was facing the door. Few individuals had their backs to the door. Too many of them had enemies. Jane sat across from him. "Looks like you're picking up a lot of rumors," she said sarcastically. "Looks like you've got Bob and Flower covered," Rafe retorted. "They got to the church fine. The priest will be studying our finds by now." They were both silent for a time. Then Jane asked, "Have you learned anything useful?" Rafe shook his head. He had a sad look in his eye. "Sent out some feelers." "You think anyone might know anything about the lost city?" Rafe shrugged his shoulders. "Wouldn't still be a lost city if people knew where it was." They were silent again, and at last Jane just blurted, "Why do you hate elves so much?" "They are the wretched scum who enslaved humanity just after they freed themselves from the dragons, and orcs like your friend from the museum." "He's half-beast," Jane reminded him. Rafe sipped a little of his drink, then placed it on the table. "Is it half empty or half full?" Jane got the point. Then she said, "Which part of that is your elf side?" Rafe froze, his face turning red from anger or embarrassment. Jane could not tell. At last he drank half of his remaining booze and placed the mug on the table again. "1/4, he said. One of those things raped and imprisoned my grandmother, then left her to starve behind bars when the Longmons escaped. The grandfather I accept as my real one rescued her, and her baby girl, took her in as his own, raised her, my mother. She was picked on mercilessly as a child and persecuted endlessly as an adult for being half-elf. The Longmon lady, they called her. After giving birth to me, my father could not handle the constant harassment, and he left. I was 5 when she at last offed herself. That damned whore, he ended, and he drowned the rest of his drink. How can you call her that? Jane asked. She left me alone in the world with these, he said, revealing the pointed tip of his ear. That wasn't her fault. She carried on this curse. She was picked on by others. You have no idea, he said, raising his voice. Jane backed off. She didn't know how others would react to a partial elf in their midst. He wiped the hair back over his ear and said quietly, "You can't imagine the shame." Bob was scowling in silence, sitting on the pew next to Flower. He muttered under his breath, naming the inventory of treasure they had lost. Flower was oblivious, taking in the colored sunlight again, but his serenity was broken when Bob's grumbling became louder. "You okay?" he asked. "Of course I'm not okay. You gave away all our treasure." "That treasure for the gods." "That treasure was for us. We liberated it." "We get treasure only from grace of gods." "We get treasure because we fight for it. Gods go willy-nilly whenever they please, here or back to their playground, wherever the hell they go. No curse in church." "How about no stealing in church? Like not stealing my property?" "You have nothing without gods. Your people be nothing without Moradin, the dwarf god." "What did he ever do?" "He protect dwarf Northlands when Longmons come. He protect you now. You give to him in thanks." "I'll give him thanks," Bob said, hopping up from his pew and beginning to lower his trousers. Just then, a dart flew by, just missing Bob's head. Outraged, he looked over to see a cloaked figure behind a pillar with a pipe. There were several more behind other pillars. An assassination attempt. Flower now saw them too. He cast an aura of protection around them just as the other darts came in. Bob grabbed his axe and started at them, but stepped past the border of the protection spell just as one of the darts found him. He fell back, feeling the poison coursing through him. Flower's face flushed with rage. The peace and serenity that had been growing there was now replaced with every muscle tensed in his body. "No hurt Flower's friend!" he shouted, the voice of the monster now roaring unchained. He leaped over the pews in a single bound and grasped the first assassin's head, squashing it under his fingers and palm. The next assassin shot him square in the chest with a dart, but the poison had no chance against the barbaric rage now coursing through Flower's veins. He punched the assassin against the wall, leaving a dent in the stonework and flattening the man's body. Bob pulled together whatever strength he had and charged one of the other assassins, hitting him, but only wounding. The others ganged up on him. Flower bellowed like a lion across the room and came at them, but he may be too late to save Bob. But then the priests appeared from the doors at the front. They shouted incantations and pointed their fingers toward Bob and toward the assassins. Nothing seemed to happen, and the assassins shot their darts into Bob, which should have killed him. But their poison had no effect now, and he seemed pumped up and more powerful. His axe began to glow, and a bright smile grew across Bob's face. He looked one of the assassins square in the eye and nodded. Yes, this is about to happen. Within seconds, he had chopped 2 of the assassins into pieces, and the others were running for the exit. Flower barred the doors, and the conspirators cowered, one calling for mercy. The priest told Flower to stop, but it was too late. His rage had brought out the beast inside him, and he tore into them, tearing their flesh, tossing their body parts, and showing no mercy. When he was finished, he looked up at Bob, blood dripping from his face and hands, and he said, "Friend." In many churches of the good faith, this would have been the end of Flower's involvement. But St. Cuthbert was the god of vengeance, and Flower had followed their tenets. The priests had wanted him to stop only because the assassins might have had information. They were part of a grander conspiracy. The priest told Bob and Flower, after Flower was calmed down, that they had studied their archives and found that the symbol they discovered is one from a cult which wishes to bring back some of the powers of the Longmon gods. Not the Longmons themselves necessarily, but the power of their gods so that they may wield the power they had. This cult was a secret one which believed there was only one god, and all others must bow before it, as well as other worshippers. This was the reason the priests called this cult the One God Cult. They did not know who this one god was, or if it was real, but it could be dangerous if the followers stayed true to their word, for the best way to kill other gods was to murder its followers. The parchment the party had recovered was indeed a cryptic map, which the priests were able to decipher. They gave the completed map to Bob. Flower's hands were still sticky with blood, and told them to be careful. The cult was probably already there, and was trying to stop them from finding the lost city of Nan Salvoth. "Very well," Bob said. "We'll just collect our things that Flower accidentally placed in the donation box, and we'll be on our way." "No," Flower interrupted, his face as serious as when he was raging. "They stay." Did you like this video? Then be sure to subscribe to see more and share us with your friends. Also, if you'd like to support us financially or just give us a tip, consider a donation on Patreon. A little donation from each of our viewers helps us expand the videos, keeps the channel going, and helps us make more of them. You also get bonus videos and a big thank you from us.